Hey everybody, it's Brian, and this is a birthday episode of the podcast, meaning the podcast has his birthday pretty much this month. I'm not sure the exact day. I should look it up. The exact first episode of the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. For those who were around 9 years ago, it wasn't called that Brutal Truth. It was originally called the Maverick Selling Method podcast, which was the purpose of starting it was to get the word out about my book, The Maverick Selling Method, which back then you had to buy. Today you can get it for free by sharing a screen image of you listening to the podcast, screen image of the podcast, not you, unless you want to include you, and posting it on LinkedIn, tagging 2 other friends, salespeople, hopefully, and I will send you the copy of the PDF version of the whole book. But let's get back to the birthday celebration. I wanted to kind of give you kind of a summation of the top 5 things that have really stuck with me over these last 9 years. Because I didn't start the podcast to become a podcaster. I started it as a way of getting the word out about the book. I had no experience in book promotion. I was a career enterprise salesperson. I obviously was writing the book to share my knowledge with people. I think the motivation was kind of weird in that a casual friend of mine had written a book and gave me some misleading stats on how many copies were sold. But and I didn't write it to make money. I did write it because I wanted to kind of start the next phase of my career, which I thought the natural progression, it seems to be that everybody does it, is become like a sales trainer, a consultant type person. But to get out of the daily grind of being a rep, and the thing was, I didn't dislike being a rep. I disliked working for managers who weren't that good. So I empathize with a lot of you. And if you do have a great manager, it's a real treasure. It really is. And if you are a great sales manager, you are the magnet that keeps people coming back. Because anybody who's worked for a bad manager, and I had worked, my last job, the manager was just, the KPI type, had no value, was just terrible, just insanely bad, political player, no value add. Didn't understand how to sell the product or deal with customers, was just a robot. And I go, but if that was the exception, it would be one thing. But that's turning into the rule in a lot of times today. And it's unfortunate. And I kind of understand why, because they've got dashboards now, and their managers have dashboards, and the CEO has dashboards, and nobody wants to talk to anybody. Nobody wants to understand it. And certainly the culture of a lot of companies is let's just fire people instead of fixing it. And even after the 3rd time you fired a rep in a territory, they still think it's the rep. You're like, well, either you're hiring the wrong person or there might be something else wrong there. So anyways, I was kind of, getting to the point where I didn't need the money. I had done really, really well in my career. I had saved money. I was also running up against, just hating to travel. I'm really tall, and sticking my lanky legs into a coach seat on an airlines multiple times a week was a painful experience. And you just get tired of it. You get tired of staying in hotels, eating bad food. It's just too time-consuming to find good food, and it's a grind. And the money is good, but when you have enough money to not work, then the money doesn't seem to have that impact on your life and how you feel the way it used to. So writing the book, and I love sales though. I didn't want to give up talking to salespeople. I did not want to give up selling. So I didn't really quit for several years after I started the podcast. And of course, once people found out you had a podcast, a YouTube channel, and a book, every employer was kind of questioning your dedication to the job. And it's like, I do it on the weekends. Back then, they were 5 minutes long. I remember being in my kitchen. I flipped open my MacBook, and I just started riffing into the microphone in the built-in one. And now I've got a full-blown studio. I've got multiple iMacs, super all maxed out in memory and chips, and professional microphone and mixer and all of that stuff. So quit complaining about the sound. I heard you for years, and I ratcheted it up every year. And today it's probably as state of the art as you can get. But what I really got out of the podcast and transitioning into a sales consultant trainer was that I got exposed to so many different companies, people, markets, and there was a lot in common, but there was also a tremendous amount of difference in that, and that's why I hate all these sales trainers that are on LinkedIn. It's my way is the only way, and you got to use the phone or use social, or don't use social, don't use the phone. It's like, stop it already. What works, the medium has changed, and how you use the medium has changed, and it's changing so fast right now. I'm telling you, my strategy, I look back even like from 1 year ago, has changed at least 3 times, and that's why the course is dynamic. Is because each person's market is different, each person's use of the phone, social, email, drop-bys, gifts, whatever they're using to break through the noise and connect with other people is changing so fast right now that if you don't crowdsource it and keep up with it, because I'm spending a good 8 hours a day really studying what's working, tracking what's working, and as soon as I see a downshift in one thing and an upshift in another, I've got to change it, because if you get caught in my space behind the curve, you get overrun by somebody leapfrogging you. And obviously the podcasting space has blown up in the last 4 years, and certainly my dedication to it has blown up. Probably around 4 years ago, it went from a once-a-week show. I think 3 years ago, I went to 2 times a week. I started the B2B revenue show 2 years ago. The sales questions one I separated out probably 3 years ago. And I started the career sales or the career advice podcast this year, because it is just a great way for people to consume content, information passively, meaning that you can drive in your car and listen, you can walk while you listen, you can work while you listen, you can do other stuff while you're hearing all of this pure gold. You don't have to have the screen in front of you, stop doing everything else. You can consume it passively. That's what makes it so powerful. And, last year there was a big washout in the podcast space because a lot of people found out that it's hard to make money doing this. You have to have some unique expertise or capability and a huge audience. And the huge audience takes time, no matter how famous you are. I mean, and a lot of people are astroturfing, meaning making them look a lot more successful than they are on iTunes and the internet. But that's their business, I guess. And I mean, you saw it with the big names that came out like 3 years ago. And when you're in this space long enough, you can tell who's faking it and who's not. And the same thing, we saw it with Twitter, we saw it with LinkedIn, we saw it with It's a bunch of scams, and you see it on YouTube all the time. And I don't know about you, I get a little sick of it. A lot of you don't have very good bullshit meters, I'll tell you that. But my bullshit meter kind of goes off the charts at times when I see that stuff. So let's talk about kind of my big 5, my top 5 that I've learned doing this, and kind of that transition to becoming kind of the sales trainer, consultant, Ray Donovan, if you wish. Number 1 is that people can't see what they need to do because they're doing it. Meaning that the first law of the Maverick selling method is people will always do what's in their best interest. Now, this is something that I grew up with. Both my parents were salespeople, and they really had this ability to predict what everyone would do. And it wasn't once you understood it, it wasn't really a fifth sense or anything, or a mind reading capability. It was just understanding that people do what's in their own best interest. They won't appear to do that. They won't say that, but that's what they'll do. And evolution is 100% behind this, because our first instinct is to survive. And that is so ingrained in us over the hundreds of thousands of years as human beings that it's not going to change. And it tricks us in sales because we're out there constantly trying to get other people to do what we want. And what blinds us from convincing them of that is that we're not doing what they want. And this takes people, you have to really bang people on the head or lead people to this. Because they don't get it, because their mind isn't wired that way. None of our minds are wired that way. We tend to get better at it with age because we have other people in our lives. We have, friends and spouses and maybe eventually children and grandchildren, or some cases. And what we find out is when we are able to help other people, they become open to helping us. And we don't accept that, acknowledge it, or do it for a long time. So the only way to get us to do that is to have somebody kind of coach you through it. Let me see what you're doing and how you're doing it, because our mind sees what we want to see. It doesn't see the flaws. It doesn't see how we could do it better. And it's hard to have, even with, like, you've been to a gym, you do an exercise in front of a mirror, but then there's the gym rat that comes over and goes, hey, you're using your back wrong here. Hold your head up. Don't be putting your chin up there. Put your chin even here. And then all of a sudden it makes sense and you're able to do the exercise correctly. That's what we need in sales. And a lot of people just can't take feedback at all because they're very sensitive, and ego is the enemy in sales. But the paradox is we need the ego to be in sales. We need to feel good about ourselves. We need to be competitive. We need to be results-oriented, achievement-oriented. But that also has a side effect of preventing us from seeing our flaws and accepting that we're not perfect. And I talk about this a lot in the podcast, but every day it kind of gets reinforced that, boom, I was on to that when I made that the number one law in the Maverick Selling Method, because it was the predictor of what would go right and wrong within deals. And a lot of us don't recognize it until after the deal is over and lost or won. But if we could predict it before then so that we could correct our course, and that is hard to do on our own. Either you're a super reflective person, which I became. I wasn't originally. I talk about having this stack of notebooks that I kept, because when you're on a plane or you travel a lot, you have a lot of downtime. And a lot of people, either eat or chat on the phone. I would make notes and I'd predict. I'd try and predict what would happen next to kind of adjust my radar and my take on what people would do. And the question I would always ask is, what's in their best interest? Their personal best interest, not the company's. And that was something that it takes a long time to accept, that people, especially today, I can just tell, what people are going to do by the actions they're taking and how they're going to win, what's going to look good on their resume and their career path. And I can predict who's going to become like a sales podcaster or a sales expert, or who's going to write a book, or who's going to. It's kind of funny that all of a sudden yep, that's going to happen. It's just like watching, single people match up at a bar or at a party or something. You can kind of like you get a sense about what people are going to do next after a long period of time. So number one is focus on that number one law of the Maverick Selling Method. We're going to do what's best for us. Other people are going to do what's best for them. The key is to turn what we want them to do with what is best for them and show them how. If you're able to do that, because that's what selling is, at the very core is aligning what you want to sell to what's in your customer's best interest. And obviously, when the complexity goes up, there's a lot more people, and each person is different. And what do we do? Instead, we make it what's best for their company, which is secondary to what's best for them. Number two is everyone's moving way too fast. Everyone's going for the no. Everyone wants to automate, and automation is not bad. Obviously, if you've been a listener of the podcast, you've heard me talk about sales automation. Huge fan, big user, big technical guy here. So it's not the automating that's bad. It's the depersonalization and not taking the time, because now we can automate getting the time back, taking the steps to go through how people think, instead of rushing, which causes them to shut down. Now, if they don't shut down, what you want is somebody who will always talk to you. And I give several cases, and if you listen to all the interviews, there's certainly that pattern that you see through all of them, that the best salespeople build interest. They don't rush for a no. They don't ask too soon. They ask questions that they know the answer to. They lead people to where they want to go. And to do that, you have to know that. If you don't know that, you have to have somebody teach you that and guide you through that process. Now, that means you have to put some effort in, and you might have to take some feedback. Number three, wait a second. I almost talked about number three, is leading the sale. Too many people are reacting to the sale. It was probably 5 years into my career before I learned that I have to lead the sale. Too often I was asking, what would you like to do next? And I didn't have a next step in place. And that might seem, that's rookie mistake. Well, ask yourself, on all your deals, how many of them do you have the next step identified? How many times do you go into a call where you don't have 3 alternatives for the next meeting outlined? How many times have you thought through, what are the things that they're going to bring up that may catch me off balance? How do I prepare for them? How many times do you do that? I'm just asking. You don't have to answer now. This is not an interactive quiz. This is a podcast. So number 3 is knowing that you have to lead. But to lead, you have to know where you're going. To know where you're going, you have to understand how companies buy. And to understand how companies buy, you have to have somebody teach you that. Free book on the B2B revenue.com webpage. Just sign up for it. It gets free to you. I don't spam or anything. I haven't sent out an email yet, so leave me alone. Number 4, now this is kind of a system that I'm building here accidentally. Number 4 is prevention, and nobody does it. And we're, again, wired this way. This all comes down to human psychology and that why we're so bad at selling. We don't come out of the swamp knowing how to sell. We are basically wired to be terrible salespeople. Even if we have a personality, that's to be likable, to get a reaction. But to actually guide somebody through a decision-making process with their interest in mind, we're not really wired that way. A lot of us may be wired to get what we want immediately in a short term and ask for it, and maybe trick or have the 500 different closes that we memorize. We're pretty good at that. But actually preventing something from going wrong, we're not good at that. That prevention is an element of our wiring as human beings that really doesn't come about. It has to be kind of beaten into us. And then if it's beaten into us, we become too anxious and paranoid about it. And then we become annoying. So when you think about, because there's certainly, the helicopter parents that are constantly looking, and as parents, we can kind of prevent it for other people. And we're good at showing other people what can go wrong, but we're not good at showing ourselves what can go wrong. How many times, when you were a kid, that your parents said, "Oh, bring an umbrella, do this, don't do that, don't hang around with them, be home early. If you don't do this, this is going to happen," and we get sick of it. It's annoying because we're adults and we think we know that stuff, but we're usually the worst at our own prevention. Pretty good at other people's prevention, but sales is a prevention profession. And if you don't think so, try not preventing the things from going wrong. And you got to ask yourself, when the things that do go wrong, how often has this gone wrong? Have you had something go wrong that was a surprise? Really a surprise? What are the usual things? They don't reply to you. They go radio silent. They lose interest. Their manager doesn't want to do it. Oh, there's no budget, whatever. It's all a bunch of excuses. It's lies. They're all lies. They don't want to because it's not in their best interest, because they don't know why it's not in their best interest. And we've got to prevent. We've got to, if you follow your sales pattern, you'll see exactly where, if you don't prevent the things from going wrong. And I get it. They're tedious, lazy, little things that are annoying to do, that we hope we can skip. And sometimes, because 80% of the times we skip it, it doesn't go wrong. So why don't we just forget about it? The problem is then we don't get the deal. We don't get paid. And I said this on the podcast a lot of times. Nobody has ever asked me a prevention question in 9 years. How do I prevent this from going wrong? No one ever says that. It's like, how do I get them to talk to me? How do I get my deal moving again? How do I get this deal to move faster? Why won't they talk to me? Why won't anyone call me back? Why won't they open my emails? All of this. But it's all prevention. It's understanding and doing the homework before. And it's tedious, and I get it. Nobody likes that pointing it out. And a lot of it is kind of the grind of selling. But if you outline it and you see it and it's there every time and you build it into your routine, then it's smooth sailing. And trust me, I'm the same way. Every time a deal of mine goes wrong, any of them surprises? No. Could I have prevented it? 9 times out of 10. Could have prevented it if I had done something. But, why didn't I do it? Laziness, mostly, because I could probably get away without doing it. And is most of the time, you got to think 9 times out of 10, preventable. Okay, enough of that. Brian, you're annoying me. Number 5, and this really is probably something I've realized within the last 3 months, is that people who are out there, the knowledge seekers, the people who can't listen to enough sales podcasts, can't listen to enough books on Audible, or read a book a day, whatever they do, knowledge. Well, that's good. That's nice. That's it's kind of unrealized money in a way. But if you don't apply it to anything, you might feel good for having it. But in sales, knowledge doesn't get you very far. It's the actions, it's the skills of the knowledge. Say you learn a new technique. You take these 5 things and you learn it. But do you really apply it? Do you really integrate it? Do you become the artist of doing it instead of the checkbox, I know it? And this happens all the time. And I try and use the artistry in these, like comedian. Writing a joke is easy. Telling a joke is hard. Getting people to laugh is hard. Coming up with something that's funny is not that hard. And the difference is that I'd say 90% of comedy is delivering it. Same is true with sales. There's a million cold calling pitch books out there, and they're all good. And if delivered by the right person in the right way, could work. But what's the difference? Anyone can sing a song, but very few people are going to pay to hear it. That's the difference. It's the delivery of the knowledge. And that's what we have to work on. And why don't we do it? Again, it turns into this ego thing that we have to be able to get the student ready so that the teacher will appear with the knowledge and the feedback on what you're doing. If you're able to do that, you'll get to the A level. If you're not, it's going to take probably 10 years and a lot of hustle and grind that you'll probably wear out on. So this is what everyone looks for. They think it's the knowledge, knowing the easy button. And the thing is, the easy button doesn't exist. The easier button exists, meaning that what I try and show you is the easier way of doing things. But is it the easiest? Maybe, maybe not. But how do you become good at it? You do it. You see the feedback. The market gives you feedback every day. The market tells you how well you're doing. When I say market, I mean when you're selling, are you getting the order or not? Your customers, your prospects, they give you feedback every day. If you're not getting great feedback, you're not doing it in the best way possible. Are you going to figure it out on your own? Maybe. Maybe you will. Only if you're open to it and only if you accept it. But what do most people do? They shut down, they rationalize, they justify it. Everyone does it. I do it. You do it. We all do it. So if you don't open your mind to it and get better at it, because look at what great people do in any profession. Let's say you're not at the A level in sales. Think of what are you at the A level at in your life? It could be a game. It could be a skill, a sport. It could be whatever you really have a natural inclination to do and have done for years, and you're pretty good at it. Let's say it's cooking. And you know the distinctions between an A-level dish and a B-level implementation of that dish. How did you learn it? You did it over and over again, and you took feedback, and you were open to feedback. If you're not open to feedback, it may not be an A-level dish. It might not be. So, and me as a knowledge provider, this kind of plays against what I do. But what I found in working with reps, because I've been doing the sales consulting thing for probably about 5 years full time right now. And I wasn't good at it at first because I thought it was just knowledge, giving people the knowledge about how companies buy, about how to use their strategy. And then what I would hear is, Brian, hey, we did that, but it didn't work. Well, what didn't work? Well, we did the technical sale, then the business sale, and boom, we did the justification, but they didn't buy. Well, nothing works every time in sales or with people in general. And then you kind of like, do you think we could do it a little different? But people basically say, oh, it doesn't work. Well, what does work then? Well, nothing works. Well, something works. Somebody bought the product. My point here is that the knowledge is part of it, but it's a small part of it. It's really doing it, getting feedback, taking feedback, and doing it again. Look at that Showtime thing on the Showtime episode on the tennis coach. I wish I should have wrote this down before I recorded it. The word love is in it because the tennis context of love, not the romantic context. But it was basically this tennis coach in Florida. I've used this analogy over and over again, but these were the world's best tennis players. But they went into this camp when they were young. And what did they get all day long? They do it, get feedback, do it again. Do it, get feedback, do it again. If you were coaching somebody on anything, what would you do? You'd show them how to do it. You'd let them do it. You'd give them a little feedback. You have them do it again. You show them how to do it. They do it. Give them a little feedback again. Right? That's how you would do it. You train anybody. I'm sure you've taught somebody something. That is the model. And what happens when somebody becomes great? It's the one that wants the feedback. The one that cries and runs away doesn't become good at it. Then you say, well, they'll learn on their own. People do. I learned selling on my own. I had some good managers, a couple of, I'd say, great managers, but very few that invested any time in me. They would answer my questions and help me, but they were out for themselves. If I didn't close deals, they didn't keep me, right? And that's the game of sales. So nobody has an invested interest in you. Now, think about what else have you learned on your own, and how did you get feedback? Did you listen to it like a podcast? You can do that on your own, but if you don't listen to it and you don't take feedback, and we mix up, because sometimes feedback is hate, where it's just, competitors putting it down or criticizing it so that people will most likely find their stuff. That's not constructive feedback. I'm talking about somebody who really has your interest in mind, and that's what a coach is. So, and that's what I looked for when I did sales coaching on site or sales training, because too often you get brought in by the manager who says, Brian, fix these people. And these people see nothing wrong. So you had to sit down and talk through and line myself with them. They wanted to make money. They wanted it to work. They didn't want to go. Nobody wants to go find another job, start all over again at scratch, learn a whole new, IT system, a whole new product, whole new customer base. Nobody wants to do that. Everybody wants to make the current thing work. And people get into this learned helplessness. So those were the key 5 things that I wanted to share with you over these 9 years. Hopefully in the next 9 years I'll learn some more. But I'm going to keep bringing the podcast to you. I love doing it. I honestly do. And I'm super grateful for everyone who listens, who shares it with other people. You are my sales force. I've tried a bunch of things to try and get listeners outside of the organic way. None of them have been really as effective in any order of magnitude. So that's why I keep asking you to tell somebody, to share it on LinkedIn, because when somebody tells another peer that, hey, this is helpful, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help you. Yes, I charge for the courses. I'm trying to turn this into a business. And it's a business right now. It really is. But those courses you get, if you don't get 100 times the value from that, then there's something wrong. And what I mean by that is you get, essentially 25 hours of coaching, all your questions answered with the office hours. You get the community, the network effect of listening to other people, getting other people's feedback. And it is building a system. Meaning that you are, after that year of taking that course and getting involved, you become an infinitely better salesperson. You can go from the B to the A. Now, I can't make you take it. I can't make you learn it. I can't make you take feedback. A lot of people, they don't come to office hours, or they don't ask questions, or they don't share what they're doing. And that's your choice. But the people who do are blowing it away. And that's the difference between the A and the B player. And if you become vulnerable enough to say, hey, how can I do this better? I want to know how I can do it better. And literally, that's the question I ask myself every morning. How can I get better at this? How can I become the best at this? Because with that comes the things that you want, instead of pointing the finger at why you're not succeeding, because it doesn't matter. You're probably right, but you don't have control over it. You have control over you, the most important sales machine in the world. Hey, thanks for listening. I'm sorry I rambled on here, but I'm really happy to celebrate the 9th anniversary of the podcast. I'm going to do at least 9 more years, whether I like it or not, or you like it or not. But Also want to thank my partners, Pipe Drive. They've been with me probably the longest, and a product that I'm super happy to use every day. I hope you check it out. Brutal Truth coupon will get you 30 days free. Also Nudge. I use Nudge every day to scour the internet to tell me who's in market and what they care about. Discover.org, those guys, Hank over there is doing a great job. They just came out with a new capability of bringing in-market data into their data set, which is the best in the industry. Also, who else? Co-Video. Jason over at Co-Video is a great guy to work with. Video, email, they just announced the integration with Salesforce. You should check that out on their company page on LinkedIn. Super powerful capability. Video, this is the year. If you're not on the video train, you're missing out. Anybody else? Gong. My boys over at Gong, Chris Orlob and Udi. I really appreciate your support. You've been with me quite a while. Gong is doing some great research on sales. And if you're at a company, get your manager to take a look at Gong, because that feedback that you get from each sales call and getting it better about your talk-to-listen ratio, all the signals that it's giving you about the quality of the call. If we can get sales managers to focus on quality versus quantity, that is where we get better. No one cares how many deals you lost. They only care about how many deals you won. Yes, they'll throw the lost deals up in your face. Also, one more. Here's another. Rainmaker Force. That's right, Rainmaker. I know there's a different use of Rainmaker, but Rainmaker Force, all one word.com, they have this new capability that basically sends out a survey via email that your customers can enter electronically, and it gets put into the CRM. So you get the customer's feedback on what you're doing and how the sale is. So you get their much closer to the truth. So check that out as well, rainmakerforce.com. Make sure you're checking me out at b2brevenue.com. Please follow all the podcast pages on LinkedIn, Brutal Truth, B2B Revenue, Sales Questions, and Career Advice on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. 9 more years.